Playing Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. This week, Roddy Nikpour dives into the album The Record by Fear, which dropped in 1982.
Wow. Talk about controversial. I can't even think of anything to say other than, would this record come out in 2024? I feel like no record label is taking a chance on this record if it were to come out today.
We have nothing to fear but fear the record. Yeah, I mean, this is like, talk about cancelable. I think that would be career ending, I think, today.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, before this show gets canceled, let's get into this episode. It's The Record by Fear by Roddy Nikpour. We're getting into it.
Before we begin this episode, I want everyone to just take a deep breath. Seriously. Because we've just been through a very, very stressful season of political tension. So again, with me, just take this deep breath and now, just in time for your post-election catharsis comes this entry on Kurt's list, which contains some of the most indignant, nonpartisan rage ever expressed on a record. And not just any record, The Record by Fear.
For every one of you that voted, this is for Republicans and Democrats alike.
Fear represents the pinnacle of the hardcore scene in Los Angeles at the time, and their debut album represents some of the best tropes that we've already heard in some of the earlier episodes of this podcast, like from Black Flag, MDC, and other must-listen punk albums. So for longtime listeners of the Cobain 50, this episode is going to feel like that level in a video game that tests if you were paying attention to all the new power-ups that you learned in the levels before. Since 1977, the only consistent member of Fear has been guitarist and singer Lee Ving. And since then, the band has had more than a dozen rotating members, including, at one point, the likes of Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. If you were to name a band something as simple as Fear today, in 2024, you'd probably have a hard time telling people how to find your music. But back when they were starting, almost 50 years ago, search engine optimization wasn't a thing. Even if it were, I still think that Ving would have said F that and called the band Fear anyway. You see, before the World Wide Web, people weren't tuning into your album based on how easily they could find it on Google and stream it for fractions of a penny on YouTube or Spotify. It was all about the vibe of your album cover, the word-of-mouth recommendations, and, above all, how killer your live set was. And much like the Sex Pistols before them in 1976, Fear's infamous chaotic live energy was broadcast on television. In Fear's case, on Saturday Night Live, Halloween, 1981.
Look out for surprises. Ladies and gentlemen, Fear!
Fear was only invited to play SNL because of famed cast member John Belushi. Belushi refused to appear on the show unless Fear was the musical guest. Apparently, he was a huge fan. SNL needed John Belushi because of low ratings, so Fear was part of the package. And if it's any omen to how this would turn out, let me remind you that John Belushi was arguably best known for his role as Bluto in the 1978 film Animal House. You know, the movie all about debauchery and college frats.
This could be the greatest night of our lives, but you're gonna let it be the worst. Oh, we're afraid to go with you, Bluto. We might get in trouble. Well, just kiss my ass from now on!
Sex Pistols were banned from the airwaves in the United Kingdom because they cussed out their host and also criticized the Queen. In Fear's case, they had an entourage of famous punk rockers to join them on stage. We're even talking Ian MacKaye of Fugazi who was there. And the issue was not one of corrupting the youth, it was one of breaking equipment. The instant Fear started playing their song, that mob of punks started slam dancing into each other and, importantly, into studio equipment. According to a mini documentary on YouTube from a channel called Punk and Tomatoes, one audience member even threw a pumpkin into the audience. And that was the moment when the network cut away to dead air.
And supposedly it was like the first time in like 30, 40 years that they went to dead air.
Stage manager got hit with a pumpkin during our performance and smashed all over.
Smacks the guy right in the head with it. The guy falls on the ground. Then the next thing, that's when the hit the fan. Everyone's picking up pumpkins.
According to the New York Post, the quote-unquote riot caused $200,000 worth of damage. But that number is still contested. It's worth noting that by the time that the band was able to cause this much damage and get banned from Saturday Night Live, they had not yet even released their debut record, which would be coming out the next year. The record has a true punk runtime of just 27 minutes, made of 14 quick hit bangers. No song is longer than 3 minutes, and some aren't even a full minute long. This reminds me of MDC, who released their debut of quick hits a few months earlier.
We don't want you to miss a shop and buy. We don't want you to say bye or die. Business is on parade. Corporate scam charade.
The sound on this album is also very reminiscent of other punk bands in their heyday. Sex Pistols, Dead Kennedys, and even Black Flag. You know, sloppy guitars, crashing drums, shouting vocals. The record also features a lot of swearing, which is really fun for punk rebellion, but also makes my job as a radio producer really hard thanks to the Federal Communications Commission, so you're welcome for all the fucking bleeps. The record opens with Let's Have a War. It's a commentary on how the United States treats war almost like a pastime, simply because there's so many of us. And since the US has grown by more than 100,000 people since the album was written, it almost feels like the US has continued to find reasons to engage in warfare and blame the middle class while they're at it.
Blame it on the middle class. Let's have a war. We're like rats in a cage.
The first half of the second song, Beef Bologna, kind of sounds like your drunk uncle playing his blues guitar at Thanksgiving when no one asked him to. Only to be backed up with a band in the second half. And I have to say, between this and the My Bologna parody that we heard in the Knack episode, and the Spam parody in the REM episode, we're dealing with a lot of deli meat in this series. Except in this case, the lunch meat is not a byproduct of Weird Al. Not to mention the whiplash of going from a song about the bleakness of war to a song about some girl who's wanting the singer's beef bologna. It's the same energy that Black Flag gave on their debut when they went from Rise Above to TV Party in a matter of minutes.
TV party tonight. TV party tonight! TV party tonight! TV party tonight! We're gonna have a TV party tonight! Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do.
Another notable song on the album, I Don't Care About You. And listen for a second, and then I want to ask you something. I want you to be the judge on this. Like, given the way that Lee Ving sounds on the mic and the context that they're a punk band coming up in LA in the 80s, do you think that he's literally apathetic about homeless people dying in the street? Or is this like good old punk irony that we've heard in bands at this time who are trying to call out issues through the perspective of the transgressors. Just for example, in that respect, it's similar to how Gang of Four calls out society's resigned attitude toward romance in the song Natural's Not In It.
Dream of the perfect life. Economic circumstances. Nobody is good business. Sell out, maintain the interest.
I Don't Care About You is not the only song critiquing living in the city. There's We Gotta Get Out of This Place, and also the more straightforwardly named I Love Living in the City. Spoiler alert, this track also takes advantage of that quote-unquote punk irony to make the opposite point of what it's saying.
My house smells just like the zoo. It's chock full of shit and puke. Cockroaches on the walls. Crabs falling on my door. But I'm so clean cut. And I just wanna some slut. But I love living in the city.
And there's one city in particular that gets an anthem on this album. New York's all right if you like saxophones. We'll come back to this one.
New York's alright if you like drugs in your doorway. New York's alright if you wanna freeze to death. New York's alright if you wanna get bumped or murdered. New York's alright if you like saxophones. New York's alright.
Foreign Policy offers some of the same themes we heard on Let's Have a War, except this song ends with the literal sound of a bomb dropping, and it's pretty right on the nose in terms of the themes. Let's not forget, for the millionth time in this podcast, that punk kids saw their enemy as Ronald Reagan. Disconnected offers a pretty concise argument that might resonate today in the era of social media. The song also includes a few non sequiturs, like eat skunk. Like, what is that about? Then again, Nirvana used non sequiturs all the time. I mean, a mosquito, my libido. Call it nonsense or call it poetry. Either way, it is certifiably punk. And lest you believe that these rapscallions were all about debauchery, the record also features 2 love songs at the end of the album. Well, I won't sugarcoat it. The first one, Fresh Flesh, is a pretty disgusting song about objectifying someone's body. It starts out in kind of an oogie, fun Halloween way.
Fresh flesh, oozing through the slime. Fresh flesh, and the city's mine. Fresh flesh, fresh flesh.
But let's just say, at least in my opinion, it takes a turn for the misogynistic pretty fast. So much so that I don't think I'm even allowed to play you the rest of this song. And again, you be the judge. Like, is Lee Ving a terrible person for writing this song? Or, like Nirvana with the song Polly, is singing from this grotesque perspective an effective, poignant way to call out injustice and prevent it from spreading? Perhaps as the immediate come down from Fresh Flesh, Getting the Brush takes a sludgier tone. I mean, honestly, it kind of sounds like something out of Black Flag's My War. The same crumbling instrumentation that's scoring the singer's increasingly depressing reflection. In this case, arguably, his reflection on loneliness.
I call my baby, but she never picks up the phone. You know what I mean? She just leaves me there.
And then there's the final song, No More Nothing. It snaps us back into a more traditional punk vibe that you can almost imagine Johnny Rotten singing. It's all about calling out fakeness in the contemporary world. No more Playboy, no more Newsweek, no more Walter Cronkite. No more watered down television trash. No more nothing. Oh, and there is another song that was later included on the album, a holiday song that gives voice to a selection of our population. It starts with a somber, seasonal tribute.
Don't despair just because it's Christmas. Children there are so gay at Christmas.
And just as you start to think, oh wow, these bozos are on the straight and narrow, singing about disparity among children at Christmas time, years before Band-Aid. No.
It's not so great.
And then that's it. Like, the album ends, you kind of feel like a kid regaining consciousness after falling off your bike. There's a new scab on your body somewhere. You didn't notice it before. The record may not have earned many major awards, but it did end up being the band's most well-known album out of the 6 that they've produced in their time so far. Tons and tons of bands have covered Fear too, including Soundgarden covering I Don't Care About You, except they did omit some of the F-bombs that littered the original version. The song was also covered by Guns N' Roses. Guitarist Slash called it an anthem. In 1994, he told Q magazine, quote, "Fear was the only band that I really liked. I couldn't really tell you all that much. They were just a bunch of fucking rowdies." Oh, and Guns N' Roses was also less concerned about keeping it PG. Arguably more famous than their music is some of the pop culture that their music, or even the band themselves, is part of. 2 standout examples are Fear's appearance in the 1981 film, The Decline of Western Civilization.
You will remember this. If there's any A&R people in the audience tonight, go die.
And they were part of the soundtrack of the 1999 film, SLC Punk.
I love living in the city!
And now, 4 years later, I was a college graduate. We did what we could to f*** things up, but the system is strong. And there were many, and we were still few. But this fall was going to be the fall, all right. Bob and the rest of us had made an oath to do absolutely nothing. We were going to waste our educated minds.
And Lee Ving made an appearance in Dave Grohl's documentary Sound City, in which he performs a song called Your Wife Is Calling, alongside the Foo Fighters.
Your wife is coming. 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 Your wife is coming.
Ving has also had a prolific acting career too, appearing in a variety of TV shows and movies, including as Mr. Body in the 1985 film Clue.
The only way to avoid finding yourselves on the front pages is for one of you to kill Wadsworth. Now.
As far as Fear's legacy goes, I do need to come back to some of the more inexcusable moments on the record. For the record. Much like MDC, Fear had to reconcile with some of its homophobic themes, including on the song New York's All Right If You Like Saxophones. In the song, Ving calls out, again, with a layer of punk irony, all the bad things about living in New York. And unfortunately on that list, he includes, if you're a homosexual. As a way to reconcile this problematic lyric, and to showcase a different lineup, Fear re-recorded the record in 2012, and they called it the Fear Record.
New York's alright if you like being pushed in front of the subway. New York's alright if you like tuberculosis. New York's alright if you like art and jazz. New York's alright if you like saxophones. New York's alright.
This revision doesn't exactly excuse the initial problem, which is something that we've explored already back in our conversations about MDC and Bad Brains earlier this year, so I'll spare you the ethics lecture. And as this all ties back to Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, I don't think I have to say that much. Fear called out injustice in the most raucous way possible, and between their punk irony and unruly performances, it's really easy to see why Fear made it on Kurt's list alongside other punk bands coming up in the early 80s. The jarring nature of Fear's songs just kind of makes you feel fear itself.
That was Roddy Nikpour on Fear's The Record from 1982. Oh, man.
I got to say, to start off, some of these songs are very funny.
Start positive is good. Beef bologna, like.
Oh man, yeah. Like where do we start with this? What were your impressions of this album?
It was a lot. It's a lot. It makes a first impression for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I dabbled in Fear a little bit in the past. Like I feel like probably 14 years old is probably the ideal time to find Fear's The Record. And I don't mean that to be totally disparaging, but it really, to me, epitomizes a lot of that early era of like hardcore punk. And that like, it's like so much of like that era when I listen back to it, it reminds me of being 14 because that's the time when you're feeling rebellious and you want to push the envelope and like say things you shouldn't say and do things you shouldn't do. And that's so much of that era, right? Like we talked about like on the MDC episode, like the use of like slurs and homophobia, like it's so prevalent, but it's like they're trying to use it to be contrarian.
Right.
And of course, you listen to it now, like as you mentioned in the intro, it completely doesn't land and is like, oh my God, this should have been scrapped. But it really documents that time, is what I'll say.
Yeah, that's the thing about shock value is that it doesn't age well. And so like, yeah, when you are doing something for satirical effect or, you know, anything similar to that, it, you know, especially when you use coarse language, when you use slurs, when you use, you know, words that genuinely offend people. Like it's not the thing where it's like, oh, I'm embodying, you know, the average American or whatever. Yeah. I think a lot about comedy in this aspect and how comedians back in the day will say, oh, that was just, you know, a product of its time, where nowadays, I think the difference between our generation and past generations is that our generation has learned to use that effect more subtly.
Yeah.
And I think that artists of our generation can make the same points that say, you know, let's start a war is saying, while not using offensive language and, you know, like getting to the spirit of the argument rather than just using shock value to get people's attention.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It makes it a hard listen for sure nowadays to go back to a record like this and with the 21st century lens on it. Like it's like, oh my heavens. Like that's quite offensive. It's like an interesting thing because like the politics of that era in the punk were quite progressive, but the execution was just like totally the opposite.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially when we talk about punk being a community rather than just a style or an ethos. I think a lot about what you were saying before we started recording, and that you absolutely refused to play this when you were driving your daughter. And I think that's a good measurement for albums like this, like punk albums, regardless of the subject matter, like, can you play it around your kid and feel okay about it? Like, I think when you play Damaged around your kid, like, that's a different notion. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that they can gravitate towards without, you know, having to explain too much about, hey, this is a word you probably should never say around anyone.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, I think Damaged, like, gets to the point where, like, rise above, right? Like, yeah, rise above this bullshit. Don't say bullshit, Una. But, you know, to being above these things as opposed to Fear, just like, what's that song? Something Flesh. I was like, oh my God, I can't deal with this right now.
You can say bullshit around Uncle Martin, Una. I won't tell anybody.
But yeah, I mean, I think like so much of this too, like snark, right? Like it's embedded in it. Fear is not the only band to do that.
Of course.
It's so much a part of it that like, it's like that anger and funny comes out together as snark.
I think that, you know, there's some good stuff about this. Like everybody to a degree hates where they live or has a love-hate relationship with where they live. Songs about apathy towards homeless people. Like, I understand that because I see a ton of it as, you know, I'm sure a lot of people who live in Seattle do. And I think these are subjects that resonate with people. It's just kind of the shock value that sort of, you know, it's kind of off-putting in a 21st century lens.
Absolutely. Like it's all about like going as extreme as you can, being as taboo as you can. And I don't know, maybe that broke through to people at the time. Like it certainly spoke to people. Like Fear was like in their scene, and then underground hardcore were kind of the apex of that. Like I think if like musically, I would say that if you're trying to like get someone into hardcore music and trying to explain what it's all about, this is a great way to do it in 30 minutes. Like give them Fear's the record, and at least musically, like that encapsulates so much of it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But then you have, you know, the other stuff that is less savory. I continually come back to their infamous scene in the seminal film, The Decline of Western Civilization, which is, you know, the definitive punk movie, I would say, where they are using some extremely offensive language to kind of goad the audience. And yeah, like that, you know, like I said, that stuff doesn't hold up very well.
Yeah, definitely not. Which all kind of like builds into this like moment with the SNL performance. I feel like, which one, we talk about this album come out in 2024. Can you imagine this happening? Like Roddy talks about it in the script, but like imagine like Colin Jost being like, can we get fucked up to play SNL this week or something? Like, and even that wouldn't be as extreme as this.
I was going to say, like, not even fucked up would be as extreme a performance as Fear.
The fact that it happened is just so crazy. Going back and watching that footage it's genuinely funny.
But yeah, like going back to your question of would this performance exist in 2024? Like, I don't even think it would be considered. I don't even think the band would be considered. I feel like bands are vetted pretty well, probably because of this incident for SNL.
Yeah, this definitely had to have been a turning point. But I feel like playing New York's All Right if you like saxophones at SNL is genuinely very funny. And maybe one of the funniest things that happened on SNL.
Yeah.
With a group of punks, like Ian Mackay is slam dancing. Like it's truly like a surreal document to watch. It looks like you're watching footage of just an underground punk show, but it's like at Rockefeller Center. That's truly wild. And definitely set a precedent for other bands who similarly got banned from SNL. I feel like it's a pretty rarefied club. There's like the Five Timers Club in SNL. I think this is the way cooler club to be in, the band from SNL.
Oh man, like Cypress Hill, who were banned after DJ Muggs lit a joint on stage. Going back to a few months ago, where Cypress Hill played this year's Bumbershoot 2024. Be Real and Sin Dog had lit joints literally the entire time. Like there was not a point in their performance where one or both of them did not have a lit joint while they were rapping and smoking between verses. So I think the world has taken a real turn.
It'd be really disappointing if they weren't, and they're just like, stay safe tonight. You know? Stay safe, stay lucid. Thank you. I mean, of course, it's Sinead O'Connor ripping up the picture of the Pope on stage, a very like pivotal moment for culture, pop culture at large.
Yeah. Everyone of a certain age sees it in their head vividly. As soon as you mentioned it, like I saw it. It's one of the most striking moments in music history, I think.
Absolutely.
And then there's one of my personal favorite SNL performances, because I feel like a lot of them are just kind of, bands are going through the motions and stuff. But sometimes you get really inspired stuff like Rage Against the Machine, who were banned after hanging American flags upside down on stage after the crew had removed them. And during the performance, tore a flag on stage, which is, obviously something that would get you in big trouble even today.
It's like surreal to think that they thought that Rage Against the Machine would do what you told them. Like, do us a little bit of vetting. I mean, that was decades after Fear.
Yeah. Somebody should have done some due diligence before inviting Rage Against the Machine.
You think these guys are going to listen? I don't know. But I do love this idea, like, that even still that punk bands can infiltrate the mainstream in this way. Nirvana certainly did that on SNL, on MTV, VMAs, that like there's still artists out there who are in that legacy of Fear, of willing to really push the envelope in terms of like, SNL is one of the biggest stages you can really have, and it's going to be documented for seemingly forever.
Yeah.
And to like use that moment that's supposed to be like a good thing for your career, and to like instead give the middle finger is pretty badass.
Yeah, I think so. It kind of takes me to the present day, where it feels like a lot of the musicians, bands, artists that get big spots kind of, play it safe, kind of play it nice, happy to be here.
Yeah.
It's like, I was racking my brain to try to think of like the most controversial things that have happened during late night performances nowadays. And the only thing that I can think of was Randy Randall from No Age wore an Obama shirt during a late night performance, and they made him take it off because of, the partisanship rule, which we are very familiar with here at KEXP. Yeah. And he turned the shirt inside out, and I believe he wrote free healthcare on his shirt. And like that was the most controversial thing to happen on, late night television in kind of a while.
Yeah. It's kind of surreal to end up in that space after decades of artists really willing to push against it.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone will. If you're out there, Billie Eilish, show us what you got. This piece was produced and mixed by Roddy Nikpour. Our podcast manager is Isabel Khalili, and Larry Mizell Jr. as our director of editorial.
And in the spirit of fear, I'm going to urge you to give us your fucking money. But seriously, If you like what you hear on the Cobain 50 or any of our podcasts, please consider donating. It could be a one-time donation, or you could become an amplifier for $6 a month. All of it goes a long way to supporting the station, supporting independent music journalism. And if you'd like to donate to us directly, do that through kexp.org/Cobain. I am Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters. And I'm Dusty Henry. Dusty. Gosh. I'm Dusty Henry. I'm not a crook. Yeah.